The coronavirus continues to dominate the social conversation. There are a lot of feelings that people are experiencing right now, but there's one feeling in particular that I think a lot of us are going through, whether we realize it or not, and that's grief. Often we think of grief only as something we experience when someone dies. But the truth is that we can experience grief through any number of significant losses. As a writer and speaker and entertainer, I was really looking forward to March. I had all sorts of book signings lined up. I had shows lined up. I had a vacation planned that was going to be the first trip I've been on in 13 years that wasn't just for business. Chances are there's a lot of things that you've lost also. If you're a high school senior, for example, there's a lot of things that you might be missing out on this year. Things like prom, or even wondering what's going to happen with graduation. Perhaps you've missed out on spring break and being able to travel. If you're older, maybe you were looking forward for spring break to bring your children or your grandchildren to come visiting, and now you don't know when you're going to get to see them again. Grief is the emotion that we experience when we've suffered a loss. What we do with that grief, our outward response to the inward feelings, that's what's called mourning. When we experience a loss, it means that we are bereaved. And the word bereaved literally means to be torn apart. Being torn apart means that we can be put back together. And that's a process. The most famous process for coping with grief is the 5 stages that are outlined by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Those stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The important thing about these stages to understand is that all of us may experience them in different ways. We might experience one for more time than another, and we might even hop back and forth between a few of them over time on our journey. As I contemplated grief, it occurred to me that the stages of grief also closely resemble the structure of the monomyth, the hero's journey, as outlined by Joseph Campbell in his book, The Hero of 1,000 Faces. It's the traditional 3-act structure that we see in most stories. Stage 1 of grief is denial. In the hero's journey, we call it the call to action. The hero has lived in the ordinary world that they have always known, but something has thrown that world into chaos, and they have been called upon to go on an adventure. Initially, they don't want to. They don't want to believe it. They don't want to accept it. They don't want to go on that journey. Think about what's going on right now with COVID-19 and some of the responses that you've seen from people. Think about some of the frustration that maybe you've had at people who've been going out and living their life like nothing is wrong. It's denial. It is rejecting the call to action. And we see that over and over in popular stories. Consider Harry Potter not wanting to have to face Voldemort or even accept the fact that he's a wizard. Imagine Luke Skywalker seeing the hologram of Princess Leia crying out for help, but not wanting to go and thinking that he just should stay at home on the farm and the familiar world is already known. Imagine Frodo Baggins offering the ring to Gandalf because he doesn't want to go on the journey to Mount Doom to destroy it. Whether it's COVID-19 or the grief that can come from any other loss, it's a journey that we don't want to go on. But the good news is that we don't go on that journey alone. And we have words of comfort from God who tells us in Joshua chapter 1 verse 9, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." When we are bereaved, we don't want to confront our feelings because the main feeling that we're wrestling with is the feeling that there's nothing that we can do. But the good news is that once we accept that call to action, we don't have to go it alone. God is with us, and God will be our strength. Stage 2 of grief is anger. In the hero's journey, it's called crossing the threshold. It's the point of no return. Like Neo from The Matrix taking the red pill, or Luke Skywalker stepping aboard the Millennium Falcon, or Bilbo Baggins leaving the Shire to go on an adventure. Anger is the step that means we are no longer in denial and we are ready to feel. And what we normally feel is anger. Why is that? Well, to answer that question, we need to understand what anger is. And normally what anger is frustration over our inability to resolve some conflict. It's feeling like there's nothing that we can do. But what happens when God is the one that you're angry at? Often when we experience grief and loss, it's very common to become angry at God, to want to know why God is doing this to us, or at the very least, why God is allowing it to happen. These are common feelings that we all experience, and even Jesus himself experienced it when he was on the cross, calling out to God, wondering, why have you forsaken me? Our goal is to become more like Jesus. But his goal was to become more like us, to be able to identify with us, to be able to commiserate with us, to be able to understand us in our sufferings. Not only can that bring God a lot closer to us, but if we allow it to, it can bring us closer to God, which brings us to the next stage of grief, bargaining. In the hero's journey, we call it the innermost cave. It's Simba at the lake. It's Luke Skywalker standing at the bridge learning that Darth Vader is his father. It's the hero's lowest point. It is their place of desperation. And a lot of us know what it's like to be there. We call out to God and we say, oh God, if you would just do this, then I'll do this. If you will get me through this, I'll go to church more. Lord, if you'll spare my business, I'll give more to charity. We all know some of the bargains that we want to make with God, but the truth is we can't bargain with God because the reality is that we have nothing to offer. God is the one who has something to offer us. It's his Spirit, and he offers it to us freely. One of my greatest sources of joy is my dog Bertha. Now, this is a story I do tell a lot, but unfortunately, Bertha has a really bad habit of crying in her sleep. And whenever she does, I always walk over to Bertha and I gently pet her. She never wakes up, but it always calms her down. She always stops crying, and then she goes back to sleeping comfortably. What's interesting about that is that the reality that Bertha is experiencing in that moment isn't reality. In the teeth of her nightmare, she does not know that I'm there. I am outside of her dream, reaching in and giving her comfort that she can't see, but she can feel. And that's the way that the Holy Spirit works with us as we go through the teeth of our own living nightmares. We can't always see God in our circumstances, but in ways that we cannot understand, God, who is outside of all of this, reaches into our reality to provide us comfort, to provide us peace, to provide us strength, and to provide us hope. This brings us to the next stage of grief, depression. In the hero's journey, it's called the breakthrough. It's when the hero finally resigns themselves to face the final obstacle, to prepare themselves for the final battle. It's their breakthrough out of the cave, moving forward. It's Neo in the subway, Simba returning to Pride Rock, Luke realizing his purpose wasn't to defeat Darth Vader, but to redeem him. Like depression, which wrings us out, the task is uphill and overwhelming, and there is nothing that you can do but climb. But our comfort comes from Jesus himself, who tells us in John chapter 16, verse 33, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." This brings us to the final stage of grief, acceptance. In the hero's journey, it's called the realization. And the realization is that there is no going back. The obstacle may have been overcome, but life will never be the same again. And the entire process is all about coming to terms with one inescapable truth. There is nothing you can do. You can't change what's happened. The purpose of grief was never about trying to get over it, but to come to peace, with your new reality, to learn how to integrate all of these experiences and all of these feelings into who you're going to be moving forward. Make no mistake, the coronavirus will pass. You're going to go back to school again. You're going to go back to work again. You're going to go to the movies again. You're going to travel again. You're going to live again. But life is never going to be the same again, because you aren't going to be the same again. If you're mourning today, I just want you to know that it's completely okay to feel whatever you want to feel. You're going to have good moments and you're going to have bad moments. And everybody's grief is different. Everybody grieves at their own pace. But if you are grieving right now, I just want you to know that even if you can't see it, if you can't feel it or even believe it, the Spirit of God is near you. And He wants to comfort you. He wants to guide you out of this cave, and He wants to call you on a whole new adventure.